We're sinking. Can y'all please come?
And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's on board.
So from
We're
that,
sinking. Can y'all please help? 4 words. That's all it takes to turn a missing persons case into something the state can no longer explain away as a tragic accident. Because somewhere between that radio call and a boat pulling back into dock hours later, 18-year-old Nolan Wells simply stopped existing in anyone's account of what happened. No goodbye, no witness who can say for certain when he vanished. Just a gap in the timeline wide enough to drive a truck through, and increasingly, it looks like someone drove one right through it. Nolan Wells was a college football player. The kind of kid whose life was supposed to be just getting started.
so we have to talk about a huge new phase that we're now entering in the investigation into the death of Nolan Wells. If you recall, 18-year-old college football player disappeared while out boating with friends on the July 4th weekend. They were going to Horn Island. This is off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. His body was found nearby 2 days after he vanished. Now, the family has met with the district attorney.
On the 4th of July weekend, he headed out to Horn Island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast with a group of friends. 2 days later, his body was recovered nearby. For weeks, the official story was simple: no foul play suspected.
To be clear, by the way, last week, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter indicated there is no reason to suspect foul play. We have no reason to believe that that conclusion or belief has changed. But as we know, investigations do develop, they evolve. And yes,
case closed more or less before it ever really opened. But simple stories have a way of falling apart when people start asking who is actually watching the clock. Here's what we now know, and it should make your skin crawl. GPS data pulled from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources shows the boat left dock just before 10 that morning and arrived at Horn Island a little after 11.
More witnesses, eyewitnesses to what they saw about the boat or who was involved. And by the way, let me go to this part. So CBS News obtained GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and it tracks the boat's movement. So I want to walk through that timeline. This is information they say they obtained via records request. So it appears to suggest that this boat, this vessel, left the dock at approximately 9:56 that morning, arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. According to GPS data, the boat then reportedly left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon, returned to its original departure dock, then traveled into Fort Bayou at around 5:52 before returning to the dock at 6:06. Later that evening, the boat went into the Fort Bayou boat launch at 7:19, traveled overland, which would suggest that it was possibly towed by a vehicle to the owner's residence. And to just kind of put this into perspective,
Ben Crump, the family's attorney, says Nolan was last seen alive on that island at 3 in the afternoon. The boat didn't leave until 4:31. That's 90 minutes unaccounted for. 90 minutes where a boat full of people who supposedly loved this kid apparently didn't notice he wasn't with them anymore.
That if he was last seen on the island at 3 p.m. and they apparently, not only did they leave there, go to another area, then go to dock and get towed, there's a lot that could have transpired between that time, especially putting that in conjunction with the text messages and Snapchat history that was allegedly deleted from his phone or missing from his phone. So there's a lot of time for people to get their stories straight, to talk to maybe counsel or others about what needs to be the narrative when they arrive. Now, I'm speculating to a lot of this because we don't know. There has been no interrogation of these individuals. There's been no official statements that have been issued, but it's clear that there's been a significant period of time between the boat leaving, the last time Nolan was seen, and this boat getting back to its original owner.
And look, it confirms, or it seems to confirm, right, this boat left 4:31. We still have conflicting accounts about whether Nolan chose to stay
and
behind.
Somewhere in that window sits the audio. Dispatch recordings obtained by NBC News capture the boat operator radioing for help. The bilge pump had failed. The boat was taking on water. And then, this exchange, a dispatcher asking if everyone on board is accounted for and being told, yes, everybody's on board, except Nolan wasn't, or he was and then he wasn't, and nobody has explained which. That's the anchor line of this entire case. Everybody's on board, say it slowly. Because either it was a lie in real time, or something happened between that radio call and the boat limping back to shore that turned a true statement into a false one, and either way, somebody knows which.
Yeah, everybody's on board.
Tyler, that's significant. That is a significant piece of this puzzle. What does that tell you? That there was this reported call about the boat that, by all accounts, Nolan was on at some point. It's having problems. Caller says everybody's on board. Again, we don't know for certain whether Nolan was on board during that call, but again, I think that's significant that this is happening. What does it tell you?
It's very significant. I mean, one, the statements that everybody is on board, and we don't know if Nolan was on board or not at the time, is very significant, given that he did not arrive back home safely when that boat reached dock later on that day, and he allegedly left or wanted to stay behind with a female that he met that day at that island on the lake. So it's
Let's talk
very
about what a
significant.
mutual inspection actually is, because this detail matters more than it sounds. Normally, when law enforcement seizes a phone in a death investigation, the family doesn't get a seat at the table. They wait. They hope the state's forensic team finds what needs finding. But in this case, Crump announced that Nolan's phone, which the family says they recovered themselves using a tracking app, and which they've apparently had in their possession since, will be examined by state investigators and the family's own experts at the same time. Side by side, watching the
Directly
same
from Crump.
screen.
She shared with the family that there will be a grand jury that she will turn this case over to once they have collected all the information and finished their investigation. We also agreed that we will have a mutual inspection of the cell phone with our experts and their experts. Attorney Eric Hertz is helping lead the investigation team with former law enforcement experts who are going to help us with the cell phone download.
That is not standard procedure. That is what happens when trust has
The
already
police, and
collapsed.
they're being accessible.
So let me go on to this other major development from this week's press conference. The family is now going to be allowed to inspect Nolan's phone alongside investigators. There's going to be this mutual inspection where both sides will see the contents at the same time. Tyler, is that unusual? Let's first start there.
That's highly unusual. It's highly unusual that a victim's family, along with their attorney, would be allowed to participate with law enforcement in the inspection of a cell phone data that's really the crux, one of the crucial pieces of evidence with this case. I don't think that would have happened without a lot of the chatter going on around the country about how this investigation has transpired.
When a sheriff's department announces no foul play, within days of a young man's death before autopsy results exist, before toxicology comes back, before anyone's phone has even been cracked open, you don't get families demanding joint custody of the evidence unless they've already concluded nobody's going to hand them the truth voluntarily. And the family has reason for that instinct. Reports suggest data, texts, Snapchat history may have been deleted from Nolan's phone. Deleted, not lost, not corrupted. Deleted in a case where the initial law enforcement conclusion was that nothing suspicious happened at all. Now here's where a defense attorney would want you to slow down, and where our attorney on this one, Tyler Bailey, raised a fair point. Multiple sets of hands on a phone can create a chain of custody problem down the road. If this case ever reaches a courtroom, you can bet a defense team will stand up and argue that a joint inspection compromised the integrity of that data. But digital evidence isn't the same as a piece of clothing passed hand to hand. Forensic experts can see what's been altered, they can see what's been deleted, and more often than people think, recover it anyway.
In the data.
Does this potentially present a legal evidentiary issue? If you have multiple hands on the phone, does that contaminate the evidence in some way? If there is a case being presented against a defendant, couldn't a defense attorney really hone in on that and say, look, I mean, you have to exclude this evidence. There's a chain of custody issue. Or do you say, look, digital evidence is different. It's not like a piece of clothing, right? I mean, talk to me about that.
The defense attorney may, depending on what happens here, let's say there are criminal charges and they are ones of homicide or something that's very serious or substantial, and this case goes to trial, the defense attorney would jump on that and likely try to have that data excluded. If anything, the chain of custody is going to have to reference the mutual presence of the victim being there, the victim's attorney being there along with their own experts, and the jury should be allowed to hear that, and they can weigh that evidence how they see sufficient. But if it's not excluded, it will certainly be an issue at a criminal trial that could weigh to whether the jury believes it's solid evidence, or maybe it could have been influenced by the presence of the family. But I do believe in the family in how they're addressing this.
Nothing disappears into the ether completely, it just hides. So why leave a phone behind at all?
That Nolan's phone will undergo a, quote, mutual inspection, meaning both the state investigators and the family's own experts are going to analyze the phone. So that could potentially be a game changer here. It does raise questions about how this would work. It does raise questions about how the evidence is being processed. Does it contaminate the evidence in any way? How do you have this dual investigation? And I mean, the family reportedly believes that data may have been...
The family says it's out of character, that no 18-year-old voluntarily separates from his phone, especially one who reportedly wanted to keep talking to a girl he'd just met on that island. A friend pushed back publicly, claiming it's normal to leave phones on a boat dashboard to protect them from saltwater, that there were 15 phones sitting there, that nobody was in contact with the outside world anyway. Maybe, but normal doesn't usually come paired with missing data and a 90-minute hole in the timeline.
We cover those cases all the time. I do think the location of the phone is another key component about this, right? So the family has said that, first of all, it was unusual that Nolan would go off on his own, but also the idea that he would leave his phone behind. You know, what teenager puts their phone down? But then you have this friend of Nolan's who told ABC News that, look, it's normal to leave phones on the boat. You're protecting them from the salt water. He said all their friends were out there, that they were not communicating with anyone else. Who else would they talk to? And he said that when Nolan got in the boat, he put his phone on the boat's dash along with probably 15 other phones. How do you see it?
That's not usual. I mean, even taking for what we've heard that there was a young lady that he met named Katie and that he was interested in talking to her, you would think that he would want to be able to text her later on or get in contact with her later. I don't know many 18-year-olds who aren't glued to the hip to their phone. And even if they put their phone somewhere, if they're going to stay behind, they would definitely grab their phone. And so I think that seems suspicious, if anything. I hear the friend's position on it, but it draws many people some ire and gets to the same conclusion of that doesn't sound like the 18-year-olds and 23-year-olds that we know. They like to have their phones on them and keep them close by.
And then there's the grand jury. Crump revealed that the district attorney has committed to eventually turning this case over to one, not necessarily to charge anyone with murder, but to let a group of citizens decide whether probable cause exists for any criminal charge at all.
By the sheriff's office is complete. What do you think that would look like? I mean, what could the grand jury potentially be looking at here? What kind of evidence, what potential charges?
Well, ideally, they should look at all relevant evidence here that could lead them to make a conclusion whether they believe there's enough probable cause for criminal charges or not, and not be a grand jury that spoon-fed particular information. And I think that's a big update because initially we know that the sheriff announced, I believe about a week ago, that they suspected no foul play. I do think this independent investigation, some of the pressure has allowed the DA to come to a different conclusion where there seems to be a joint agreement that this is going to go to a grand jury. So it could be text messages. It could be the lack of text messages. It could be cell phone data. It could be statements from different witnesses who could testify.
In other words, you're saying anybody looks at that and looks at a headline like, oh my gosh, you're talking homicide charges, but not necessarily. It could be something with respect to the investigation, like whether it's tampering with evidence or misleading police, something. I'm not saying those things happen, but that's what you're suggesting.
Right. It's anything that's a criminal charge pertaining to the disappearance and the death of this young man here.
That's a critical distinction, and it's one true crime audiences instinctively understand better than most a grand jury isn't a guilty verdict. It's not even an accusation. It's a mechanism closed to the public, closed to defense attorneys, closed even to the family's own lawyer. A prosecutor walks in, presents evidence, and walks out with either an indictment or nothing at all. And if it's nothing, the public may never get a clear answer as to why.
Grand jury proceedings are secretive. So there will be, for example, no media coverage of the grand jury. There's no defense lawyers are not allowed to be there. The victim's family attorney, Ben Crump, won't be able to be there. It'll be a prosecutor who's presenting the case to the grand jury that's been impaneled. If they decline to press charges, there will ultimately be questions. People may wonder whether this grand jury was spoon-fed information that would lead them to come to a conclusion of there being no probable cause for an arrest.
Secrecy cuts both ways. If the grand jury declines to indict, people will rightfully wonder whether it was ever given the full picture. If it does indict, it validates every uncomfortable question this family has been asking since a sheriff's department tried to close this out as a non-event. Meanwhile, the most basic fact of this entire case remains unknown: how Nolan Wells actually died. No completed autopsy. No toxicology. The family's own independent examination, delayed for weeks by logistical failures nobody has fully explained, still hasn't produced results. Two separate medical conclusions may eventually exist here, one from the state, one from the family's chosen experts. And if those conclusions diverge in any meaningful way, that divergence alone will tell you everything about how much faith anyone should have placed in that early no foul play statement. Here's the thesis, and it's not a comfortable one. Investigations don't drift toward grand juries and joint phone inspections and independent autopsies when everything lines up cleanly. They drift there when the people closest to a case sense that convenience was chosen over rigor, and they refuse to accept it. Nolan Wells' family didn't get answers handed to them. They had to fight a system that tried to close the book before the first chapter was even finished. a system that told them no foul play before it had a single toxicology result to stand on.
Right, we're waiting for the state autopsy. It seems that they're waiting toxicology reports, but then the family is, by all accounts, trying to do this independent autopsy out in Washington, D.C. What should we be thinking about these potential dual examinations of Nolan?
If there's a stark difference between the examinations, whether the state's examination leads to simply a drowning with no evidence of foul play or any um, strangulation or struggle versus a independent investigation from the family that shows otherwise, I think that makes it draws some suspicion. I think that just from the history of how unfortunately things have been in the South historically and still that we deal with today, and the way this investigation has rolled out, the family felt the need to do their own independent investigation. I think the toxicology report is going to be telling as well, because if you're in the water and you have some alcohol in your system, it may be more difficult to swim and things of that nature. So the toxicology report is going to be very important, and more information regarding the autopsy about his actual how he actually unfortunately lost his life is going to be relevant for both sides, whether the state sees this as evidence of there being foul play or the
90
family
minutes,
sees.
one radio call, a phone with data missing from it. That's not a resolved case. That's a case somebody wanted resolved. And the only reason we're even talking about a grand jury right now is because a grieving family refused to let it stay that way. We're going to keep tracking every development in this case, the autopsy results, the phone data, whatever that grand jury ultimately decides. If you want to be here when the next piece drops, subscribe now because this story is far from over.